and practical as something for you right now in your life. Here's how you can open this door, basically. Uh, and that was incredible. Like, he kind of starts off the book by saying, like, you don't have to spend this life suffering. Basically, you can end personal suffering in this lifetime. And, talking about enlightenment and all these kind of things, it seems like such a, out there kind of goal, or it did for me at the time. And that, then listening to all of that kind of stuff, it started to open this doorway of trust. And listening to Angelo's talks and that, really, he would talk about your whole life as part of this awakening process. That every kind of awakening finds you, and then it gave this whole different perspective on everything that had happened to me. It was like, oh, and as I started to go deeper into that and things started to shift for me experientially as well, it all started to click into place, where it was like, basically, right, there was still periods of time where my mind was making the interest in awakening and enlightenment separate from my illness. And then there was just one day when that kind of all clicked together, where there was periods of time where I'd be like, oh, if only I could go on these, long length retreats like Sam Harris to kind of realize these things, but I can't because I'm sick and I'm never going to, there was that aspect. And then listening to Angelo's things, and he was like, everything playing out in your life is kind of exactly meant to happen. Like, it's literally the awakening process unfolding.
Episode 32 with Kyle from Life with Kyle. This was a really interesting conversation. We discussed Kyle's ongoing chronic fatigue syndrome, which started a few years ago, and what has actually led him to a spiritual awakening. And we discuss exactly how he overcome his issues over the years. And we discuss a lot about spiritual awakening. We discuss some of his practices around meditation and people that he's followed over the years. He gives some really, really good recommendations. I definitely think it's worth listening through for those alone. One of them in particular, I've already bought his book and started reading it, and it is just quality. Kyle is really passionate about what he's doing. You can tell in the conversation. And like I said, just offers some really, really good insight to anyone who is going through any sort of awakening, or even those that are years down the line that maybe didn't didn't practice their kind of spiritual practice, or have kind of lost sight of that. I know that's something that over the last couple of years I did, so this is why I've been reaching out to get people with this sort of information and knowledge on the show, because I think it's really important to sort of ground yourself really when you're going through this this journey of discovering the truth, whether it is health related, diet related, or just kind of life in general, or geopolitics, or international affairs. All of these things can be quite heavy topics. So yeah, there's a lot of information here that I think will be incredibly valuable and helpful. So I hope that you do get some value out of the show. As usual, please like, share, and subscribe. Just helps to get the channel out there. I know that we're getting quite a lot of views actually, or listens, sorry, on the podcast apps, which is great. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcast as well. So yeah, please keep sharing the information. It does help the channel, and I'll see you on the other side.
Right, so Carl, thanks for joining me today. How are you getting on in sunny Amsterdam?
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Did you expect to have the weather? I know you're from South Africa, right? I'm guessing the sun shines a little bit more there than it does in northwestern Europe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we get a lot of sun in South Africa, but it's just kind of shifted to winter there. So it was like nice timing coming here. The weather's just turning nice this side, and then South Africa is just getting a bit cold. I mean, the winters there aren't bad, but yeah.
Yeah. Have you spent a winter up here in the Northern Hemisphere?
I haven't done a real winter yet.
I was just curious, are you doing like proper traveling, or are you just kind of having a bit of a break?
Yeah, like just kind of, yeah, you could call it proper traveling. Just last year, basically, I did traveling in Europe without a lot of plans, and then I met some people, and this time I've come to so I'm staying with a guy in Amsterdam that I met last year, and then I might go to Denmark next. There's somebody else that I've met that I want to hang out with there, and then I'll just see. It's nice. I'm traveling on a European passport now, so I've got a lot more flexibility. Whereas last year I was like on a 3-month visa and I had to have it all planned out beforehand. So yeah, just kind of seeing how it goes. Yeah.
I envy that level of freedom. I'm going to be honest.
It's quite nice. Like doing the online work, it's a lot of freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I wanted to get you on. We're just speaking very briefly before hitting record. I've resonated with quite a lot of your information. You talk a lot about, the kind of emotional aspect, the stress and worry around, illness, and essentially kind of perpetuating this. It becomes like a loop of fear, symptoms, worry, dread and guilt and anxiety, and probably all of these things all kind of matched up. So I wanted to get you on just to sort of discuss this topic, to go into your situation and what led you to kind of similar information that, this is how I found you, by looking into this topic. Resonates very much with my own personal experience. So it's quite interested in just kind of hearing a bit about your story, what led you to what you're doing now, and hopefully we can go through some of the solutions that you're offering to any of your clients, or kind of anyone who comes to you with a similar sort of story to your own.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, my story, it's funny, whenever I talk about that, I'm like, how do I compact this down a bit? Because I've spoken about it a few times and it turns into this log thing. But I think the more you speak about it, the more you get better at summarizing it. So for me, it started with COVID in 2020. Into 2020, I got COVID, and then just after a couple of months of having COVID, there was still a couple of things that just didn't feel right. It was I was very doing a lot of exercise, so I was like big into cycling at the time. So then I was more aware of like my physical state, and I just felt like I didn't have the same capacity as I'd had before COVID. So yeah, there'd been a bunch of things, right? I went to a couple of doctors, was like, also at that time, nobody I knew had COVID. So that added some extra kind of unknown and fear around the whole virus itself. And you know how much fear there was, in the media and everything, which I think, looking back at it now, that was a lot of the subconscious priming, I think, which made me, even though I wasn't consciously so anxious about it, I think subconsciously there was a lot of fear around, this is a very, crazy virus. And then when you have a couple of symptoms that don't go away and nobody knows what you're talking about, that adds a lot to the fear and the stress and the worry.
Probably that was isolation as well, I'd imagine. At that point, there's no one that's had what you've had. Yeah. So it's isolating. It's a complete unknown.
Exactly. Right. Going to doctors and saying like, it's been 3 or 4 weeks since I've recovered from COVID, like the acute phase now, can I get back into exercise? And the doctor's saying like, well, we have to wait and see. We don't know, what the virus is like. We've heard a couple of people having longer term symptoms, and it's like you said, that real unknown of no one's been here before, basically. So yeah, not knowing what to expect. And then that was starting to stress me out. And actually, I went on a couple of antidepressants at that time because that was all that the doctors could really offer me. We tried like vitamin injections and, anti-inflammatory. It was like some gout medication and all these kind of things to try and reduce inflammation in the body. I think the doctors were just trying to be like, because it had now been like a couple of months, and, he was just like, let's get rid of this thing. So then I went to the doctor. He gave me some antidepressants to like, it's probably some stress combined with a bunch of other factors. If we can calm that down, that should abate the symptoms. And then it was a couple of months of trying different antidepressants. And the last one, I think, contributed a lot actually to the health anxiety and the stress in the nervous system, was because I went on to Wellbutrin, which is like I don't know if you know about it, but it's like it works on dopamine and norepinephrine. So it's got a bit of like a stimulant kick effect. And that was like putting me on extra edge. So I was already kind of stressed out and concerned about my health. And then I think I was just like not sleeping well. I was studying at university, third year, like kind of really stressed out. So basically, like, also just on a general, how I understand the nervous system now, it's quite clear to me that my nervous system health was like obviously under a lot of strain in that period, just because, you know, I wasn't sleeping well. I'd stopped exercising because that was one of the things, speaking with the doctors, that I mentioned my symptoms were always worse after exercising. So they were like, well, let's try cutting out exercise for a period and see if that clears things up. So I stopped exercising. So I was spending basically all my time indoors, kind of studying economics, and we were socially distanced at that time. So there was like, just looking back, it's so clear how many different factors there were that was like quite a big deal. You know, I was like not seeing people a lot. I was like kind of stuck in my apartment, holed up all day, when I used to really enjoy kind of connecting with people on the sports field, going to lectures at university. So there were all those elements. And at the same time, a long-term relationship I'd been in for about 3 years was starting to come to an end, but it was like quite a tumultuous up and down, you know, breaking up, getting back together, lots of emotional stuff coming up, which was a lot to deal with, combined with the university stress and the health stress and all of that. And it honestly just felt like my whole life that had seemed like it was going in some certain direction was just suddenly blowing up and kind of falling apart. You know, just like it was crisis. I had no idea where I was going now. You know, I was just like, I was this guy in his third year of university who loved to exercise and who had a girlfriend, and now the health was gone, the exercise was gone. I was uncertain if I could continue at university with everything that was going on, and all of this at once. And it was just like, I knew I needed to make some big drastic change, and I needed to address something. So yeah, it was like, okay, acknowledging that I needed to kind of end the relationship, which was very challenging, but it felt like a part of me knew that was something that needed to be addressed. And then it was a massive focus on health. It was like, okay, let me just see where I can start with this. You know, like I'm going to put all my attention into how can I like get rid of all of these symptoms so that I can start fresh or something like that. You know, just kind of like nullify a variable. So that's where the kind of rabbit hole down into all of the health, like we were talking about earlier, like this whole health anxiety that starts. It kind of started there because it became like my main focus, which, looking back from where I am now, was entirely necessary and important, but it did lead me down a path that got very dark for quite a while, where I basically stopped. So basically that semester of university ended. So now it was like mid 2021, and I just finished the first semester of my final year, and I still did quite well, but I was like, this was where I just decided I need to make health my priority. So I was like, I'm going to take some time, and that was a massive decision as well, because I've always been quite academically driven and quite a high achiever, which links into all of this. And that was like the first big letting go, basically, was like, I have to kind of you know, who am I going to be if I drop out of university now? Like that was kind of really a huge decision to make. Yeah, and then I started researching all on my own a lot, because I kind of come to the end of the road with the doctors that I was working with, that, you know, they just the stuff that they tried hadn't helped, and I really exhausted those options. I didn't have terrible experiences with doctors, but they just weren't able to help me. And then so researching a lot on my own, which can become quite a dark space as well. You know, the kind of researching on the internet about health is always a sketchy business. So kind of researching about long COVID, and then ending up on chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's dark, because it was like because long COVID was still very new at that time. The main correlation was with chronic fatigue syndrome. So then kind of that became my main focus, because that's been around for a long time. People struggling with these kind of very, like, because that was one of my big symptoms as well, was like fatigue and just lack of energy and And a lot of this, basically, I just checked through all the symptoms that people were struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome, and it really matched up with mine. So in one sense, it was like, oh, I found something. But at the same time, it wasn't what you wanted to find, because then I would start to read about people's experiences, and people were like, yeah, I've been stuck like this for like 20 years, and I had to kind of give up my entire life to just avoid getting worse. And then my mind, this is when the mind just starts to spiral. My mind is like, wow, like I'm 20 at that time. I was like 21 years old, and I was like, am I ever going to be able to exercise again? It was like all this fear that was coming through what I was reading about other people's experiences. And in one sense, I was trying to prepare myself for the worst case scenario, where I was like, let's just kind of, acknowledge how bad this could get. But then, yeah, you don't realize that you're kind of implementing all these fears and beliefs into your nervous system and your mind that actually have a much bigger impact on things that I only came to realize later. So yeah, all that kind of research. And then I found a physiotherapist who was talking about long COVID recovery, or like a researcher at the University of Cape Town. And then she linked me up with a physiotherapist who helped people recover from chronic pain and kind of related chronic fatigue and all of that. And she played such an important role, because she really laid the foundation for me learning to understand that this was more about the nervous system and the brain than I was for so long fixated on coronavirus and what has coronavirus done to my, I was just reading what everybody was talking about, and there was like all these theories about like spike protein and this and that, and like we're talking about as well, like the vaccines. And sure, maybe there's probably something there, but there was no path forward from there. It was just like wait around for some miracle cure, or like wait for some massive medical breakthrough to come and save you. So yeah, working with Tracy, that was this physiotherapist, she kind of was like, you want to understand that this is way more about your own nervous system's response to something that's kind of got stuck in a perpetual cycle, than there's still some like corona spike protein in your body.
Which if it wasn't COVID, it could have been something else.
Exactly.
You were probably a boiling pot ready for the excuse to create, like you said, that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was such an important thing for me to understand as well. Like, I remember the me that started working with Tracy was very much fixated on COVID, and then she made a lot of points exactly like that, and kind of showed me some research and put me in touch with some like online resources that spoke about exactly these kinds of things, which was a massive perspective shift. It was like, yeah, that's just the final straw, basically. COVID, like you said, it could have been anything. It was all this kind of build up in the nervous system, like getting so kind of wired for this, ready for some kind of big burnout. And COVID was just the kind of the ticking bomb or whatever. So that was a big perspective shift. Was like, oh, okay, let's work with the nervous system now. Let's work with my response to what's happening, rather than focusing too much on something about COVID. And that was then when I started to learn a lot as well about like trauma and the nervous system and emotional work, and a lot of that stuff was foreign to me at the time. It's interesting looking back how I had to learn a lot around that. And that's also when we were mentioning meditation as well. This is when my interest in meditation started for like the first time in my life. I'd heard of meditation, when I was studying and stuff. It was like maybe something that's good to improve your focus, or good for like, I always struggled with this distraction and then some like kind of ADHD-ish tendencies, which I think is a result of a lot of the technology we have nowadays.
It's probably linked to the very thing that led you back to meditation, which is maybe this kind of hyperactive central nervous system.
Yeah,
kind of always slightly bubbling away on edge.
Yeah, exactly. That describes it really well. I was always keeping myself busy, whether that was kind of socially, exercise, screens, always kind of on edge. So yeah, it was quite nice. Tracy, the physio, she was trained as a physio, and she also had done like mindfulness based stress reduction. She was trained as a mindful based stress reduction practitioner. So she used to run these courses. So we would talk about meditation. And I think I'd also just discovered it on my own at the same time, like reading through what was helping people deal with chronic fatigue syndrome. One of the good things I found on one of these very toxic negative forums was somebody saying that whenever his symptoms got really bad, he would try like a 15-minute meditation and it would reduce the symptoms. And I tried it and I was like, wow, this actually works. So that was like I had no idea how deep I was going to go down the meditation path, but that was the start of it, where I realized it helped with my symptoms. Then I was working with this physio who spoke about it a lot as well. And then I don't know if you know Sam Harris and the Waking Up app.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, then I wanted an app, because now I was like, okay, this meditation thing, I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, I need some guidance. So I was looking for an application that could kind of, give me some guided meditations. And I tried Headspace for a while, which was quite helpful, but then it was like a free trial or something. And then on Reddit, somebody was like, oh, try Waking Up. You can get free access for a year or something if you just tell them that you can't afford it. And that was like, it was incredible. That was like the main reason I chose the app, but it played such a massive role in kind of pivoting my life path, basically.
Because he comes at it from like a very material, perspective, and I mean, I'm quite open to the spiritual side of things, so I'm okay with that, but I can imagine a lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
It probably puts them off meditation in terms of the practical application of it, because they got some guru in India doing some some term that they don't even understand, mantra or whatever. Whereas he comes at it very very pragmatically, I guess. So it probably is a good place to start if you don't want to kind of go down the whole kind of spiritual type of route.
Exactly. And that was exactly what I needed at that point. Like now as well, I'm very open to all the spiritual aspects, and there's some really interesting stuff I'm exploring now. But at that time, as like somebody who really, I was very intellectual, analytical, had been like studying quite like maths heavy stuff. I was very much focused on rationality at that point. So that's why Sam Harris resonated so much. He was just coming at it from the neuroscience. And I was also getting quite interested in philosophy. I'd had like a philosophy course at university, and I was like, this is interesting. I don't know exactly why, but I'd never thought about looking at life in this way. I'd always been interested in like sport and that kind of stuff, but it really struck a chord with me. So that was like, I remember trying the Waking Up app for the meditation aspect, and it really, something just resonated at a massively deep level. I wouldn't have said that at the time, but I was just like, I need to go down this path. So like I was into Sam's stuff, and I mean, so then the next couple of months, my health fluctuated, and I went through a very dark period where it was kind of now like a year and a couple of months. And I'd actually kind of gone through like this period of quite a bit of hope, like finding Tracy and working with her and all. It was actually quite exciting in one sense. It was like this whole new life I was starting to explore, and now I kind of had to face a lot of like more of the emotional stuff. It was like even related to my relationship. Like we'd kind of, the girl that I'd broken up with, we'd kind of stayed in touch, and she was checking in with how I was doing, because we'd broken up because of my health at one level, but it was also other things. But basically that came to like a final end, and at the same time, like I was just starting to get quite hopeless, to be honest, because I'd worked with this physio and she helped me so much, but then I just hit this patch where I was feeling worse than ever. And now it was like a year and 2 months in, and this is when my mind started spinning all these stories, which just made things so much worse. Was like, if I'm a year, and if I'm like 15 months in and I'm feeling worse than I was like 9 months ago or 8 months ago, like how am I ever going to get better? It was just like this real phase of like hopelessness and depression, really, where I was just, I had quite a positive outlook on things for quite a while up until that period. Like I had read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read it.
I actually listened to the audio. I listened to the audiobook probably about 10 years ago, maybe.
Okay, yeah.
And I re-listened to it literally a couple of months ago.
Oh, really?
Quite interesting, yeah. Yeah, I went back to it. Similar to you, I've I've made all my physical progress, but the psychological aspect is kind of where I'm at now, like searching for meaning.
Right.
So, yeah, I sort of went back in, but yeah, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, that book I think had given me like a good perspective on the challenge of like my health and how my whole life had shifted. It was like this, seeing how Viktor Frankl had dealt with being stuck in a concentration camp and the horrors that he'd gone through, and this guy was like still had this deep appreciation for life and this incredible perspective. And I was like, wow, it really kind of planted something in me at a root where I was like, okay, no matter how bad this gets, like I can't give up.
Bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. It's so inspirational. It's my mind can say whatever it wants about my situation, but if Viktor Frankl can have this outlook on life and what he's in, that's really an inspiration. So that had given me a good perspective, but then it was really just like a little bit of hopelessness and depression and stuff coming out where I was. And to be honest, looking back at it, it was a whole mix of things, but one of the huge ones was the sheer loneliness and isolation at that time, because I really cut ties with that, like my ex at that time. And that was like really intense for me to deal with. I think there was still a lot of the emotions, like the final letting go, that was just like quite a shock, to be honest, that it was like, wow, I'm never going to speak to this person in the same way again. And that was triggering a lot of physical symptoms as well, because it was just it was like spiraling me, and then my health was going haywire. And I remember actually at the same time I had planned to go back to university at the start of 2022. That was stressing me out a lot at the time as well, because I was like, I'm not ready for this, but I had kind of signed up for it. And yeah, it was just this like, it was this, I would call it rock bottom in my path, like one of the rock bottoms, but probably the worst, because later on there were challenging periods, but I had this foundation of that everything was happening exactly as it needed to later on. So yeah, from there, that was the turning point though in like the decline, I would say. Like I went back to university to do like one course online, and it was challenging, but I had having been through that really dark period for like a month or so, I had a different perspective on things again coming out of that. It's kind of how I talk about things nowadays on my channel, that every time we go through some really deep stuff, maybe it's some like deep emotional material, some deep shadow work, it really is just something that needs to come through, basically. It's some like deep repressed emotional material that we need to come in contact with. And then on the other side of it, it's not going to last forever. The storm's not going to last forever, but it will bring us to our knees, basically, which is kind of what happened to me. It really kind of broke my ego down, because I was still fighting with life a bit. Like this is why these kind of deep breaking downs had to happen, where I just really had to start to surrender to life, and then doorways open up on the other side of that, where it's like, because I feel like you're more receptive to anything that resonates then. You're just so willing now to do anything that kind of sparks something, whereas in the past I was always avoiding something that brought me too close to discomfort. It was like, yeah, I want to recover, but at the same time I'm okay with just trying to keep myself comfortable and distracting a lot. Whereas like, boom, everything falls apart, and then on the other side it's like, okay, I have to. So this was like when I started to put more emphasis on meditation as well. Like I've been playing with it. It was very interesting. But when the symptoms were really intense, I would rather go and distract myself than sit and meditate and feel into it. So.
And the distraction is literally just adding more of a load to the central nervous system, right?
Exactly, right. It was. And the thing was, a part of me knew that. And it's only like after like I hit rock bottom that it's like this radical honesty with myself as well, where before that you're kind of, I see this with people that I work with sometimes, and in the comments in some of my videos, you're kind of trying to seek like sympathy, like selling how, and it's understandable. Like I have a lot of compassion for anybody who's struggling with this, but we also have to be honest with what we're doing with our own minds. And it's like this, yeah, like certain things don't help your situation, but you still do it, and then you complain that you've tried everything and you're not getting better. That's kind of what I was doing, and I see it on all these toxic negative forums. There's just this like, let me dump the dark side of my story, but I'm not going to acknowledge that deep down I know that there are things that I can address. Like it's challenging. Like again, I'm not trying to put a burden on anybody. It's I needed the help, and I think you'll find the help at the right time. This is for me the spiritual perspective on things as well. It was like every time that I was actually willing to go a little bit deeper, the right resource or person would appear. So
yeah, that's the point I wanted to stay on a little bit, actually.
Yeah,
because when you're in the thick of it, you don't accept that that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But essentially, like if you look at anyone that's ever done anything significant in their life, like or maybe especially actually people who love what they do, and they do like the most random job, like I don't know, say it's health related. I take on clients because of I don't know, gut health problems, and they're really passionate and they're really good at it. And then you get talking to them and they're like, yeah, I had the worst, pain and agony for years, and and it's kind of like accepting and like taking the lessons and growing and using that pain and turning it into this bigger thing. And it's also like, if we can just kind of skip the pain part and spiritually know that this is kind of happening for a reason that's beyond my comprehension right now, and if I just kind of shut off my sulking or crying or being, and just know it's going to work out, I feel like there's like, maybe that is like a form of enlightenment, is kind of knowing that. I think we all know it inherently. It's just, do you know it enough when you're in the thick of it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And I think kind of what you said, that like we need to, it's only we really realize when things really get tough, because I think if I look back at my old life, like I wouldn't really have cared if everything was going okay. It was like, yeah, cool, but like whatever, let me just focus on what everybody else is doing with their lives. And it's like, yeah, things have to get really tough. And then like, look, for me, then it forced me to like really start to question like some fundamental existential things. And then that's when this kind of different perspective starts to open up. Whereas I feel like if we don't have the pain, basically, then it doesn't have that kind of depth to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an element of we try to control everything. I know I do.
Yeah.
And it's normally people like me, and by the sounds of it, similar to you, that end up with these random symptoms because we try to control everything.
Yeah.
And it's only when, and this is where I'm at now, this is literally in the last couple of months, actually, since I've been doing a lot of meditation, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Well, I read a book which led me to a thing, and then another thing and another thing, and now I'm kind of at believing what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
And that's there has to be like an element of trust.
Yeah.
Whether it's you trust yourself that if things do go wrong, I am going to be able to figure it out, rather than putting out fires that don't yet exist, which is what I've spent my whole life doing.
Yeah.
Worrying about all these things that may or may not happen, putting out these fires, solving these conundrums, but there's actually no real utility in that, because these things maybe wouldn't have even happened or didn't even happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one thing. That's a burnout. That's a quick way to burn yourself out.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think just having a bit of faith that whatever it is you believe in, whether it's God, the God of the Bible, or whether it's the universe, or the Godhead, or whatever you've got any kind of connection to. I personally think that there's utility in believing in something, having this kind of faith. But just kind of trusting that it's going to work out. And if you look back at your life pragmatically, you can see that things kind of worked out for a reason, and things led you. You know,
Yeah.
so maybe just kind of doing that inner journey and looking back at the actual data and examples in your actual personal experience, where troublesome times have kind of led you to become stronger or new skills or tools. So it's kind of there. It's evident in your own experience. But when it happens again, you forget.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I feel like it forces us to find it at a deeper level, you know, because each time we forget, then it's like it kind of, things get challenging again, and then it kind of brings us, you know, down into a little bit more depth. And then I like what you said about trust though, because you know, it's such a, I talk with people about the kind of the whole stuff, and for so many people share, like, talking about their stories and that, like, trust has come up a lot. And like you said, like, a trust in yourself is key. So for me, like, talking about trust in the body, you know, like, okay, trusting that the body can do this, where the mind is constantly doubting it, that's key. But then there's also the spiritual perspective of starting to trust in life. And this is kind of, for me, the awakening stuff was so key for this. So, like, you know, the meditation, found that really fascinating, Sam Harris's stuff. And then I found this guy, Angelo DeLulo. I don't know if you've come across his stuff.
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, his stuff is amazing. It was like his book called Awake. It was kind of like I got so interested in listening to Sam Harris's conversations with other people, and then realizing that there was something there, like this perspective of kind of non-duality, no self, like Adyashanti, Sam Harris, all these people he would talk with, talking about this kind of realization of non-separation from the rest of life, this realization that there's no you separate from anything else. And I was like, I get what they're talking about, but I don't experience it like that. And then I found, then I went down the whole non-duality rabbit hole, and then I found Angelo DeLulo and his work.
Oh.
Yeah, his stuff's amazing. Like, he's got a YouTube channel, Simply Always Awake.
What's his name?
Angelo DeLulo. DeLulo is DILLULO.
Got him. Nice. I'll have a little look.
Yeah. So his YouTube channel is like a whole bunch of non-duality pointers and stuff. But for me, and his book is incredible. And that was where this deeper perspective really started to open up in me. It was like Sam Harrison that had laid the foundation, and some other I'd read some Buddhist book, and a lot of listening to their kind of content. But then Angelo made it very tangible and practical as something for you right now in your life. Here's how you can open this door, basically. And that was incredible. Like, he kind of starts off the book by saying, like, you don't have to spend this life suffering. Basically, you can end personal suffering in this lifetime. And, you know, talking about enlightenment and all these kind of things, it seems like such a, you know, out there kind of goal, or it did for me at the time. And that, then listening to all of that kind of stuff, it started to open this doorway of trust. And listening to Angelo's talks and that, really, he would talk about your whole life as part of this awakening process. You know, that every kind of awakening finds you, and then it gave this whole different perspective on everything that had happened to me. It was like, oh, and as I started to go deeper into that, and things started to shift for me experientially as well, it all started to click into place, where it was like, basically, right, there were still periods of time where my mind was making the interest in awakening and enlightenment separate from my illness. And then there was just one day when that kind of all clicked together, where there was periods of time where I'd be like, oh, you know, if only I could go on these, you know, long length retreats like Sam Harris to kind of realize these things, but I can't because I'm sick and I'm never going to, you know, there was that aspect. And then listening to Angelo's things, and he was like, everything playing out in your life is kind of exactly meant to happen. Like, it's literally the awakening process unfolding. And that really just clicked for me one day when I was like, oh my God, like, all of this is just kind of one thing happening, where it was like every symptom is related to this. And it was just this kind of shedding of beliefs in the mind. And then that's when this kind of foundation of trust, that there was a couple of other shifts that happened which opened it up more. But it was just this realization that you've never been separate from life, basically. You know, you're not this kind of separate struggling individual who has to solve the problem of your life. You're kind of you're completely held by life, and then there's kind of, but there's still your personal journey, if that makes sense. Yeah.
The couple of things that sort of spring to my mind is I've had this conversation with a few different guests. One that sort of stands out to me in my mind now is Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She wrote The Gaps Diet. I still can't believe she's on the show. She's incredible. Blew my mind.
Yeah.
Rattled me for like a month. Just how smart she is. But she came from a neuroscience background and then got into the gut, and then the gut brain connection, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But the sort of conversation, it led to something similar to what you've just said, which or what I'm seeing when you're talking is like these sort of illnesses or symptoms or whatever, they kind of come to you to put you on a journey,
right?
So you wouldn't be doing wherever this takes you. This might take you no further than it does now, but you just live a happier life because you're aware of these things. Or it could take you to a place where you're interviewing with Sam Harris and it's like, oh, look at this series of coincidences and events that have led me to this. But whatever happens, it's put you on this path, right? And it's almost like, as bad as it was and as horrible as it is, it without it, you just wouldn't be, kind of where you are now. And the conclusion I've got to with near enough every guest, the theme seems to be the same, whether they come at it solely from a mental perspective or a physical toxic perspective, is this kind of like mental well-being side of things, and being in control of the mind, and sort of going on this this I don't want to keep saying spiritual, but it kind of is. Going on that journey and learning about yourself and listening to your intuition and just so coming out of going sort of deeper and realizing that it kind of all comes within. And the other thing, sorry, I'm sort of just rambling on here, but the other thing, a big realization I had, and it sounds like you've had the exact same thing, is realizing that kind of life is working for you. And your body is actually only ever trying to, like, you and your body aren't enemies. And two things, you have the same thing and you have the same goal and the same purpose. And that is to heal and to fix, and most of the answers are within. But sometimes there's just a slight mismatch or miscommunication or sometimes a bit of a dodgy belief or fear or a bit of toxicity that's going in. This is kind of what led me to where I come at it from, is the stimulation of the central nervous system, which took all different rabbit holes. But essentially it's all kind of working for you. It's very easy to see it as the opposite. And as you say, these toxic forums, I imagine you say the word toxic because they're not accepting that fact, that responsibility, that reality.
Exactly. And it's so much about like breaking people down that come there with a positive story. Like that's for me why they're so toxic, is I've actually gone back there a couple of times to try and share, like, look, you can, I want to share my perspective so that you can realize no matter how dark things are, you can recover. And then people will just kind of like just say, oh, you were never sick, it was all a load of nonsense. And it's like all this kind of trauma and stuff themselves that they're just projecting outwardly, but it's very toxic because there's just no kind of positivity there. It's just like, okay, it's just this downward spiral. But I like what you were saying about like the body and life is serving you, because I think, and these illnesses, I think that's such it's what it all comes down to, right? Is seeing that your body and the sensations in your body are always trying to tell you something, basically. And also we've got certain beliefs around what's it's all this pleasure pain stuff that I want more of these sensations and less of these sensations, so then we can get into these kind of struggles and all of that. But like intuition as well, like for me, the deeper this has gone with meditation and kind of the spiritual stuff and all of that, it's like this incredible intuition that's available in the body. We just need to get in touch with it, you know. And it's when we get massively out of alignment with that, that the body is going to force you. You know, if I look back another perspective on many, like on why I got so sick and stuck for so long, was because I'd literally learned to live so up in my head that you're just trying to do everything intellectually, and you're not using this incredible kind of intuition that's kind of here for you to access. And yeah, it's always giving you input, but we become so disconnected from that in kind of modern society, with everything being so intellectual, rationality focused, you know. Yeah.
Do you feel that some people, probably yourself, if you can be brutally honest with yourself, and I know I can say it about myself as well, which was quite hard to accept.
Yeah.
They kind of get a bit addicted to catastrophe, or to the symptoms, or even the fear. You never admit it, like, oh, I love being in fear, but it's it starts to become more comfortable.
Yeah.
More familiar. Like, I'm sort of familiar with this feeling. Don't like it, but so in these forums, I can't speak for everyone in there, but these certain people we're talking about, you can't help them because they've kind of blocked it. Because do they really want?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's an identity and an addiction. I completely agree. And I saw that in myself as well, these kind of phases where it's always challenging to talk like this, because but it is true. If I'm speaking from my own perspective, there was a period where that was what I wanted. I wanted the identity of being kind of like, I needed help because I was so stuck. And I think what's really key here is why we get addicted to these kinds of things is kind of stored trauma in the body, or basically, unresolved emotional things from childhood, from growing up. And it's funny, like, learning about trauma, when I first heard the word like 4 or 5 years ago, or I think 3 or 4 years ago, at the start of this whole journey, it was such a I was like, trauma? I don't have trauma. And then kind of going deeper and deeper and deeper within to myself, was like, wow, even if you've never had a traumatic experience that you would label it as such, just all these kind of things that happen as you're growing up, all of these little emotional experiences that get locked up. There's so much in there. And I think for some people, you obviously have more than others. And also, I think maybe more sensitive nervous systems. Like, that's something that I had to come to realize about myself, as I'm a very sensitive, empathic, quite intuitive person, but I completely repress that side of myself to try and fit in with the intellectual world, So
I'm the same.
I think that
I spent half my life, well, more than half my life, thinking that, and people would tell me this as well, that I'm quite emotionless. And I know what I've realized is I'm actually incredibly emotional. Probably one of the most emotional people I know. But I was just damn good at hiding it. But then where do you hide it? And
exactly.
That, over 30 odd years of playing a role, essentially, and storing up this stuff. So it's quite interesting. You kind of really learn that normally the perception that you have of yourself is, it couldn't be further from the actual actual truth. We're just playing a role almost.
And we're so trying to put ourselves into like one certain box, and then try to hide anything that doesn't fit into that role or that box, where it's like, oh, okay, this is maybe my identity in the world for now. And then that's why we have all these struggle with our like emotions and stuff, because it's like, oh, I can't be the sensitive person and this person and that person. Whereas for me, things have shifted so much now, where it's like just seeing, because everything feels a lot more just like naturally how I express now, and just seeing like, oh wow, in that situation I'm quite introverted, in that situation I'm quite extroverted, in that situation I'm quite sensitive, in that situation I'm a little bit this and that. And I think that ties back to what you're saying earlier. It's really about going deep within and seeing that all these parts of us are parts of us. I think that's what's key, is like, we learn societally that it's like, oh, okay, these are the good parts and these are the parts that nobody's allowed to see, and you got to kind of hide that from the world. But I think just the nature of the conversations happening online nowadays, and the shift towards mental health. It's shifting a lot, which is incredible. But yeah, I think it's just acknowledging the wholeness of every single part of you, like every emotion, every feeling has its role. And kind of what we're saying with the body as well, like even these feelings of shame, guilt, fear, if we just see them as something that's here to serve us, and we give it its space to be felt and to play out, it's not the problem that your mind is making it out to be, basically.
Can we get onto some of the solutions? Because I'm quite interested in. So you've started to realize that there's a connection between the mind and the body.
Yeah.
Been taught that, you've been shown that, you've seen progress. But sometimes with these things, because there's not a lot of depth there and real understanding, and you've not really kind of got in there to see why this is happening, it's kind of got a limited lifespan, and then something else happens and then it sinks you deeper. You're not getting the message yet. You think you got it, but we're gonna take you to a new level now.
Yeah.
You've come across the kind of meditation, you've started to get into that. What kind of happened then? What was the going into meditation through Sam Harris, and then now talking about these kind of bigger spiritual pictures? That's quite a leap. How did you come there, and what happened? Did you heal the childhood trauma? Did it come out through meditation? Like, what was the kind of experience that you had?
Great questions. I love that. So yeah, basically after like kind of like I found a lot of helpful resources on Sam Harris's app that weren't necessarily just his stuff. So there was some kind of Buddhist nuns that had these more compassion-based meditation practices, and this became a foundation of my kind of healing. Like massive was learning to kind of self-heal through compassion-based techniques. So there's a couple of courses on that app if anybody's interested, called like Compassionate Awareness by Jitendriya and Jayasara, that I would just kind of listen to that on repeat, and then I would start to get this feeling of whatever comes up, you can create this love and acceptance in yourself. You can accept this part of yourself, whereas my mind had all these kind of hidden beliefs that when I'm feeling a certain way, you need somebody else to kind of kill you. Like if I'm feeling something really difficult, I need somebody else for that, and I was so isolated that just wasn't the case. So that was a real foundation of one of the techniques that I had to learn, was this kind of self-healing. So that was one aspect of it. And then I also did do this kind of neuroplasticity based brain retraining course called DNRS, which was created for people struggling with this kind of oversensitized nervous system, and people struggling with multiple chemical sensitivities and chronic fatigue syndrome and all of that. And what I learned out of that, again, was this kind of self-coaching techniques, and they call it like brain retraining exercises. And it was taking this more empowered approach to seeing how my mind and my body responded to everything. So that played a role for a while as well. Everything I had kind of played a role for its time. So in that, but again, if I look back now, what I learned out of that was, again, this ability to unlock this kind of self-love and self-compassion, which was really key. Part of it was you'd like learn these kind of steps. If you see your mind going down that reaction pathway, that kind of negative spiral, it was like you would stop and you would literally actively speak out loud to yourself. You do a couple of things. It's actually very clever if I look back at it now, like to really kind of how we're talking, to get yourself to lock in some of these things, as opposed to just knowing something but then still getting caught in our old kind of habit ways. Because that's the thing, right? There's these neural pathways that are so well worn that it's very difficult to just kind of snap yourself out of it by realizing something. It was much more of an approach of like every day retrain your response to things. And it was quite helpful. I was looking at it from a perspective of as if I was recovering from a physical injury. I was like inspired by anybody who'd made an incredible comeback from sport or something like that. I was like, they would every day do their kind of physical training to help their body recover. If they'd had like a terrible broken leg or something. And yeah, this was an important way for me to look at it at the time, that actually was like, every day I'm going to actively take steps to kind of heal myself. And this is such a much more empowering approach, as opposed to the part that I got stuck in for a while on the kind of negative subreddits and all of that, where it's just like, just wait and hope. Basically, it was like, no, you can actually heal yourself. So yeah, it was a lot around like really working with these stuck parts of myself with love, as opposed to, for so long I've been trying to fix it, I've been trying to control it, like we were talking about, where it was like, actually the part of your brain or your nervous system that's sending you down this spiral, it's trying to do its job for you, right? It's like, it has its role, stress has its role, but it's actually just gotten out of control. And instead of trying to force that, try to like nurture that, right? To say like, hey, I really appreciate what you're trying to do. Like I would talk to my brain. I would say like, I understand that you're trying your best here. You're trying to look after me, and I love you for that. I love that you're trying to do that. But let's you take a break. Just take a break, relax, rest, and we're going to focus on some other aspects. And I didn't realize how much this was actually rewiring my brain. But doing this kind of every day for like a couple of months, really things started to change for me, where it was just, I had this self-compassion in me and this different way of dealing with symptoms, that then also every time a symptom would come up, my baseline reaction, and it took a lot of work. Like, this is the key why, I often talk about these things in my videos online, and people were like, but now I'm stuck again, something like that. And it's part of the process. But I was doing a lot around like journaling to myself as well. Like every time I would get into like a difficult patch where there was a lot of symptoms and I could see my mindset was struggling again, I would kind of write to myself. But what's key here is sometimes people can do the brain retraining from too much of it's like the toxic positivity in the sense, it's like, no, I'm not allowed to feel the difficult stuff or the negative stuff. But it's more like encompassing everything, but choosing to, take a different path, take a different reaction. So this is kind of what I was doing a lot, where I was like, there's symptoms here, and it's challenging, and all the reactions are valid. The resistance is valid. The fear is valid. But can I meet that with love? Can I feel love and a bit of joy? And for me, it was a lot about love at the same time, and then I would write that out, and I would journal every time there were symptoms, like, this is an opportunity for me to heal. And that was an important kind of period.
I like that. I like that. See, instead of like a symptom happening and you catastrophize again, which you probably did at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, right, here's another opportunity. Now I'm going to set something, my body's trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
Some people might hear that and go, well, it's easy for you to say, but I've got this and I've got that.
Yeah.
Would you say, well, it wasn't that easy? It was actually really difficult. You just had to kind of style it out and stick with it.
That's a really good perspective, because I often just kind of talk from things looking back, and you can easily misperceive like what it was like to go through all of that, where really was so much doubt would still come up, right? I'd be doing all these techniques, and then I would have like a big flare up of symptoms, and my mind would be saying, that's it, this stuff doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And then it'd be like, working with it. Okay, small steps, right? This is what I say to people that I work with as well, is this like, just how can you have like a 1% better response or a 5% better response than last time? So sure, maybe you still have a tough reaction. And I had this so many times. It's like this roller coaster, these ups and downs. But it's like, instead of going completely down the negative spiral, can I do a couple of things that are going to put me on another path, specifically when things are challenging? So it's like, can I journal a little bit to do this? I used to often just record voice recordings for myself when I would talk myself through it, and then I'd play it back to myself when I was really struggling again. And then all this kind of like feedback into my nervous system slowly started to shift things. And you really can, no matter how challenging it seems at first, and no matter how much it's like, not for my case, because I really did feel like that at the time. I felt like, but something important had shifted in me, and this was that I'm going to stop looking for problems, because I used to kind of listen to something and be like, you're not consciously doing this, but subconsciously, like, can I find like this like super cynical outlook? Can I find reasons why this is a load of nonsense? Where now I was looking at everything as like, I did this brain retraining course as well, and there were parts of my mind that were like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that, but it was like, well, who cares? What if I just use this in any way that it can help to heal me? And it was like this foundation of like anything that comes up. It's like, how can this serve me? How can I use this to heal me? As opposed to like, oh, can I? And this is why I feel like I had to go through those massive breaking down of my ego phases, because, you know, then you're open, like, okay, I need to do whatever, I need to use whatever life gives me in the right way. But also not getting stuck in perfection. I feel like this is one more thing I want to add here, is that people can be too hard on themselves as well. It's like you're gonna struggle, you're gonna have ups and downs, you're gonna kind of get stuck in these difficult phases, but really just be gentle with yourself and then see, you know, how can I, you know, try something that's going to serve me a bit better.
Yeah. How dark was dark for you? Like, I'll give you an example for me. So where was I at my worst? I go into this in other interviews. I was getting vertigo. I was getting literally my whole leg was just tingling on fire all the time. Neck was hurting. Anxiety was horrendous. I was almost attaching to anything that was negative. This was during the COVID lockdowns and when they rolled out the vaccines, right? I've not spoken much about the whole vaccine thing, but I was not interested in taking it because my original like start of vertigo was off the back of a vaccine.
Right.
I traveled, did some traveling in India, and took a typhoid vaccine, and it just ruined me. This was the start of my thing. Yeah. Bad. And then I realized I had mold in my house. So this is why I've got down all these routes, right?
Yeah.
So I've looked at all the physical toxicities, the physical issues, but there's this constant coming back to the psychological thing. People might listen to my interviews and go, well, what one is it then, Jay? Is it the mold? Is it the vaccine? Is it, you know, is it the psychological? I think it's kind of a bit of all of it, which is why I have all these different conversations. But my anxiety was so bad at one point. It got to the point where I'd have an issue and I'd think about it for ages, and I would never go get it checked out because I'm like, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Trying to give me these vaccines and locking us down and all of this. So I just kind of sat and stewed on things. And then I'd finally go and get it looked at, and the doctor would be like, listen, it's nothing. And then it would be another thing. And I come to the conclusion of the thing almost doesn't matter. The problem is me attaching. This is why I asked you. Some people just kind of like, they become familiar with panic and fear and worry. And this is kind of one of the things I'm at the moment, is when life's going well, I have this kind of under subconscious kind of thing rearing its head of like self-sabotage. That's the kind of thing I'm working on now. You know, things are really good, and it's kind of like I'll just create problems. And I think that that's kind of what this all is in a way. It's just manifesting in a different way now. But yes, what I'm trying to get at is mine was dark. Was yours sort of similar? Was you in this full-blown? Because people listen to you now, they're like, oh, he sounds quite chilled out. He's doing his meditation. He's quite relaxed. I mean, how bad was it? What was it like in your head at the time?
Yeah. That's a great question, because I also, like, I don't often feel called to talk about that in my own videos, because
you don't have to, by the way, if it's
I think it's great. Like, I was reflecting on it, I don't know when, a while back, when I was like, I should actually do that, just to kind of help people realize in the really dark spaces themselves that, like you said, you can often have this impression that it's like, oh, you know, maybe it just didn't go that deep for me or something like that, when it was incredibly dark. So I think it's a great thing to touch on a little bit. So yeah, a bit of a trigger warning. I'll kind of really share how it was for me at the time. But yeah, it was really at that kind of period of, beginning of 2022, when I was really quite hopeless. And I think I actually had a couple of these dark phases, to be honest, where it was a similar kind of thing that would play out. But it was really this kind of like suicidal thoughts, but not on the sense of like ever actually wanting to go through with the act, but it was really just this feeling of, is there no way that I can just stop existing, basically, because I just had this hopelessness about my future. I was genuinely like, this whole life that I thought I was going to live, it's just not going to happen. You know, like I've lost everything, basically, and I didn't see a way out. Like that was huge. It was like feeling like I've lost everything, and then at the same time that there's no way forward. And yeah, it was like but later on, this is where, so there was periods like that where it was incredibly dark. But I think, I think what's really key is, again, always coming back to this kind of radical honesty within ourselves, which this is what helped me to get out of these kind of like suicidal thoughts, was just like, are you ever going to do it? No. So just stop going down that path. Basically, like I used to write that for myself. And this really kind of helped me break out of that, where it was just like, it's this kind of like wanting to be a victim to life. It's like, oh, my circumstances are it's like addicted to that kind of thing. And again, I have great compassion for anybody that's struggling, but it's this radical honesty of, I'm not going to do that. And at the same time, one of the things that was really triggering me a lot was seeing all the suffering in the world. Basically, like I would listen to podcasts about politics and these things that were stressing out my nervous system more, and this would trigger me more.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't recommend.
Oh God.
But that, and then it was like, how is this going to serve anything? Like I'm getting so triggered by that, and then I would just be contributing to the problem. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty dark. And then, but then a later kind of period when I had a different way of working with my thoughts, and this is where Angelo DeLullo, who I mentioned earlier, was so, in his book, he's got his chapter on thoughts, which I think is one of the best things I've ever read about kind of thoughts. And it was like, a thought is just a thought, basically. It's literally just this kind of reflection or image in the mind, but we attach so much with all these hidden beliefs, like other thoughts reflecting on this thought, and it all comes down to resistance. And it was basically just kind of letting the mind spin. So this was maybe like, 6 months later, when I'd been having a good period, and then I had a big kind of dip again, and it was very kind of demotivating. But I'd been through the real darkness now, where I was really hopeless. So just to go back to like some other aspects of when it was really dark, I would literally wake up every morning and I would be like, wow, like another, it's just this hopelessness every morning. What helped me at that period actually was Andrew Huberman. I started listening to some of his podcasts, and I listened to his one on depression, because I was like, I need something. I need some tidbit, something. And I literally, I remember like taking notes, like I was studying for like a university exam or something. And, I didn't want to try antidepressants again, but I knew I needed something to help me break out of the spiral. And that's when I started trying cold water exposure, because it was one thing he spoke about, that he was like, yeah, it can really help people with depression and that kind of thing. And I think it was a helpful breakthrough out of those cycles for me. Yeah. And I started kind of just putting myself out there, and you break out of, because again, what happens is we get so kind of stuck in our little worlds, and, closing off from everything, and then kind of exposing yourself to the outdoors, to the cold water. You're forced back into your body as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're forced into the sensations. You can't stay up in the mind that's spinning all these dark stories. Yeah, so that was really powerful. And then with Angelo's stuff, it was like really learning to use those thoughts as like an inquiry tool to go deeper into kind of awakening and that kind of stuff. When my mind was saying like, this is too much, like I just can't handle this, it would be like, okay, that's just a thought, but if that's really true, how can I go deeper with some inquiry? So talking about techniques and stuff, I started using inquiry quite a lot, and kind of using all of my suffering as fuel to go deeper down this awakening path was incredible, as opposed to looking at it as something that is wrong with me or something. It's like, use that, actually take all of that suffering, all of that dissatisfaction with life, all of that despair, everything, and put it into like a burning question of like, who are you? We can maybe talk a little bit more about inquiry if people are interested, but that was another aspect of like learning to deal with that kind of stuff, was like, it's actually an opportunity to go deeper into yourself.
Well, one of the videos I watched of yours today, just to sort of take some notes for this conversation, was around the kind of like real fear that's going on here. So like, if you keep going down that route, where does it actually lead you? For me, it was the fear of death, right?
Yeah.
This is what you were talking about in one of the videos. But it's not even really the fear of death. It's the fear of the fear, or the fear of the like, if you were going to the doctors to get something looked at, are you afraid of the actual potential disease, or are you afraid of being told you have the disease? It's the fear of, like, you know, the fear of the fear, essentially, and then it opens up to this kind of the fear of the unknown. And I
Yeah.
think that, with the COVID situation, without getting too much into that, um, the way that they kind of control people is the fear of the unknown, which manifests
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fear of death. So for me, when I started to look into that and really kind of question that, that's where I started to personally have quite a lot of breakthroughs. Breakthroughs similar to you. I go through periods where I'm just fine, stress free, no anxiety. But then every now and then I just kind of find myself kind of back there again. And this is the kind of ongoing journey. Like these things, you don't just, it just doesn't happen and that's the end of it. Catapulted back there sometimes. You learn a bit and then get back
Yeah.
practice. But yeah, did you want to touch on kind of getting to the kind of bottom, the core of at least what your experiences? I guess that's where you started to really kind of understand what was going on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like the way you said it about the fear of fear, because that's so true. It's like, it is, right? And I see that with this whole kind of illness and all these aspects of just personal suffering, is it's kind of it's fear of fear and resistance of resistance. As soon as we kind of start to open up to just feeling something, then it's not a problem, but it's this kind of reaction that we get stuck in. So let's talk about like the fear of physical health and death and the unknown. It was like realizing in myself that, yeah, like going deeper and deeper into what is coming up. I guess this is why meditation and inquiry was so important, because it's like there's a reaction coming up and we just stay on the surface level reactions so much, like whatever the thoughts are saying. But it's like, okay, but what is this actually about? What am I actually afraid to feel here? Can I go there? And this is when I would use the love and the compassion. I think it's quite helpful as well, so we don't get stuck in like a freeze state, because I've heard of this happening, and it used to happen with me as well. It's like you try to go into the difficult emotions and then you just freeze up. But if you're just like kind of gently kind of opening yourself up, it's like, okay, what is actually here that I'm afraid of? But it's okay, I can feel this. Like, fear is allowed to be here. And I feel like this is the best way to go deeper into the stuff, is like, it's okay. Whatever the mind is saying, that's okay too, because what starts to happen is, as we go deeper into these kind of root fears and emotions and all that kind of stuff, the mind can start to get quite intense. The thoughts can start to say like, I'm losing my mind. I've kind of just gone past the point of no return. I sit in this fear any longer. My heart rate's kind of shooting up. I'm just going to die. And really, again, this is where Angelo's stuff was quite helpful. It's just, that's the mind, right? That's the thoughts. It's okay. Just kind of go into the physical, right? What are you afraid of feeling? I feel like that's another big point to click, is that you don't need to understand everything on a conceptual level. For me, going beyond all of that, like realizing the thoughts make everything so complex, using these other tools that I spoke about, like the compassion tools and all of that, as a way to dig deeper into these fears ourselves, and realizing that kind of all the freedom you want is in the deepest kind of root emotions that are there, because it's like everything else is like a reaction on a reaction on a reaction. But the more we can get to kind of the core things of like, what am I always afraid of? It's like you said, like everything we're doing where it feels like we need to control life, because we're afraid of a certain outcome, and we're afraid of a certain outcome because we're afraid of a certain feeling, right? So it's incredible when we can learn to simplify things so much. For me, through meditation, and I went on a couple of retreats, and just all these different kind of teachers and resources making me realize that it all comes back down to feeling sensations at like a root level, and seeing what we're afraid to feel, and then kind of seeing the mind's interpretation of that as like, oh no, I'm going to die, this is too much. And then it's like, that's just a thought, but what am I afraid of feeling? Acknowledging the thought, because we can get into like a bit of a bypass maybe, to be like, oh, that's just a thought. No, the fear is real, but the story isn't as important. So it's like, what would it mean to stay in that place where my mind is saying, get out of here, move, do something, get away, this is too much, and it's like seeing also, this is important, or this was really powerful for me, that what's just past that door that you're so terrified of, and it's okay to be terrified of, but there's nothing on the other side except actually kind of a sense of liberation, really, this freedom of not having to run from anything anymore. And it's like this deep, it's actually like, as I've gone deeper with all of this, it's like, wow, all of these like sensations that used to feel so intense, so overwhelming, the more in touch you get with them, the deeper you go into them experientially, it actually, the fear, the sensation of like really intensity becomes intensely intimate and like kind of blissful in a way. But it's kind of, we have to go through these layers of like, and on each layer there's like a bit of resistance and a bit of fear, and like maybe a mental story and some beliefs and maybe some conditioning, of why at some point in our life we learn to kind of close up around here. Maybe at some point we got all this conditioning from other people that it's like, don't feel that, don't express that in this situation, hide this, hide that. So all of that has to come out again. All these stories of these beliefs saying, don't feel this. It's like an old belief. And by just sitting with the sensation and saying, it's okay, I can feel this, that belief can still be there, but it literally dissolves. I think this is what is so, I often get questions from people about like how do you do this work? How do you let go of limiting beliefs and all of that? And just staying with what feels really intense and uncomfortable and going deeper into that with kind of like this softness, this gentleness, this openness, and an awareness. This is where the meditation is quite helpful, of the stories, and just kind of a neutrality in a sense. And things kind of release on their own. It's quite incredible actually how it works. Yeah.
You talk about in one of your videos going deeper in meditation. Was there any like specific techniques that you found that helped you to kind of, because I'd imagine, and this is certainly me when I started, and I've probably not gone that much further than this actually, but it's kind of more this like surface level meditation.
Yeah.
So you're maybe just focusing on your breath. You acknowledge that your mind's wandered, and the gap between it wandering and me realizing that it's wandered is a lot quicker, a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And that happens for me day to day as well. So I can kind of go on this rant in my head, and I'm like, you're doing that thing again.
Yeah.
Stop it quickly. So that's been really beneficial. But in terms of going deeper, because I know some people do like transcendental meditation, or maybe they'll use like a breathing technique, or put your headphones in, listen to an app or something. What's the thing that worked for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really, I wanted to speak a bit on that kind of, because that ties in what I was saying a little bit earlier with some of Angelo's work and inquiry, because that's the thing, right? We can do quite a bit of meditation, but we can quite often stay on a surface level, and it's cool, right? There's practical benefits to that, and all of that calms the mind, but we also miss out on this like real depth of kind of transformation that is possible. And there's a couple of techniques that were helpful for me. One was really going deep with more concentration style meditation. So it's like that, focusing on the sensations of breathing, but going deeper and deeper into that, more subtle, and practicing for longer periods of time. So I read this book called The Mind Illuminated, and it was such a comprehensive guide to kind of the real deeper aspects of meditation, but it also created like a great kind of stepwise path for people from the kind of beginning phases of just reducing mind wandering, right? It's like it's so helpful to just work with where you're at, and realize mind wandering is very normal. So that was helpful for me, was to like, okay, mind wandering is normal, but then as that comes out, can I go deeper into like subtler sensations? So that's one aspect, but I still, for some people that doesn't quite click, but I do. That's a great resource as well, that book, The Mind Illuminated. And for me, that really did take things deep, because then I was meditating for like long periods, and I would go into these deep states where there was just kind of the like less and less distance between me and the sensations of breathing, and it would get more and more like these small sensations would start to feel like, there was just so much depth to them experientially, like getting kind of more, but doing it from a curious perspective and an enjoyment perspective, as opposed to a chore, which is how I would do it for so long. It's like, oh, I have to meditate this and this and this. And that book kind of showed me like how to make meditation enjoyable. And it was like really focused on, maybe start with some sensations that naturally feel good, like there's some tingles in your hand or something, but then go deeper and deeper into kind of those sensations. And over time, if we do this consistently, we can really have some like altered states from that, and that can start to shift things quite a lot. So that's one aspect. The other one, which was also fundamental for me, was when I came across Angelo DeLullo's stuff. He talks a lot about self-inquiry, and that is, I think, a great answer to the question of how do we take meditation deeper, because the mind can get quite comfortable in meditation, and it sometimes doesn't really challenge the ego structures and the identity structures that are keeping us feeling apart from life. Whereas I started to do this kind of self-inquiry, and Angelo, for me, like Sam Harris talks a bit about self-inquiry and like who's the one experiencing things and that kind of stuff, but I felt like Angelo's he made it so simple, right? So for people that are interested in it, on his channel, there's like he's got a shitload of videos, but he's got playlists which make it quite easy to navigate. And I started using his inquiry playlist, and there's like basics of awakening and stuff. And he would say like go deeper and deeper into the sense of you, right? And he would give kind of pointers on how to do this. So like if I could share it, it's like you can just start by asking yourself, who am I? Or who am I if I don't refer to the past or the future? If I don't refer to a single thought right now? Who am I right now if I cannot go into this timeline that the mind wants to create? Like the mind will come up with all these thought answers of, it's like, oh, I'm Kyle, or I'm Jay, I do this, I've been here, I'm going there. But it's like that's not here, right? Who's experiencing that? And the more you practice this, we kind of go deeper past the thought. So it's like this inquiry question, but you need some fuel for it, which is kind of key. Like if you're just asking it like on an intellectual level, it's maybe a good place to start, but you need some fuel into like, I actually really want to kind of know the answer here. Is like, what is this feeling of being me, basically? So yeah, inquiry, I think, is a
you mentioned about inquiry, right? So going into the inquiry, digging a little bit deeper. But my thing is always like, where to start with that? So maybe I'll check out this dude's channel. That'll probably be a good start for anyone listening.
Yeah, that's the thing. That was so, because again, also it sounds so like abstract sometimes as well. Whereas Angelo has these like videos that are literally to help you kind of point you into yourself, into inquiry. And that was so helpful for me, was to get this taste of it. And I've used his pointers. That's the best word for it, is like pointers. It's this kind of video that is not about sharing something with you to learn conceptually for your mind to take notes of. It's to point you experientially deeper into yourself. And coming back to that, at first we can still stay on an intellectual level, but still something is starting to go a little bit deeper. Even when we start with a bit of inquiry and it feels like we're staying on such a mental level, the more we kind of really start to get curious, because eventually, this is what happened for me, is that you eventually open up to this massive mystery. It's like, once I stop going into all the thoughts, right? Because the thoughts are deceiving in the sense that it makes it feel like we know who we are. But once we really go deeper into that, and it ties back into the stuff about the unknown, there's this incredible mystery of it. It's like, oh my gosh, this whole life I've been believing all these stories about myself. But experientially, what I am is an absolute fucking mystery, But it takes some discernment.
That's all I need, is another bloody mystery. Oh, God.
But it's like the foundational mystery. So, yeah. But I think that's what starts to happen as we go deeper, and it starts with just like, a bit of a curiosity, but then that becomes like the fuel to go deeper as well. But I really feel like what's so helpful is pointers from somebody who's speaking from that space. And Angelo, for me, is like, it's incredible how effectively he can do that. So yeah, some of his videos, in some of his older videos, he's got like funky backgrounds and stuff. And I remember my mind at first was like all these judgments. But if you're actually just kind of open for like listeners listening to this, if you're actually open to just feel into it, right? See if something resonates. Maybe watch a couple and start with like the inquiry playlist, maybe basics of awakening, because there's some more deep and non-dual pointings where it's like exploring like where is there a sense of separation between me and a sound, and those early on are very, the mind just, we stay so much in thoughts and it's very difficult to do that. So in the more kind of inquiry playlist, there's a lot of good stuff there. Yeah.
Awesome. So you've essentially learned to heal yourself through doing this practice that we've just detailed, right? Where's it taken you in your life, you know, day to day? So if you can get through what you've got through, which I presume you have, that's why you're teaching this. So
yeah,
you've overcome a lot of those issues, or all of them, hopefully. But you still need to live and get on with it. Do you find that this practice has helped you to just kind of enjoy life a little bit more? Are you stoic in the way that you interact with things that go wrong? And actually, another part of this question, if something happened, a new symptom, brand new, you know, and it's not anything to do with what you've experienced before, do you believe that you now have the foundation to go at it a very different way? Or do you still sometimes fear, you know, have you been tested yet? And do you like tested life? And do you feel that if you were tested that you'd deal with it a completely different way?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it touches.
Sorry.
No, it's good. Yeah, but I like it. There's a couple of things to tie in here, and yeah, I'll talk about the kind of dealing with what things have been like, and basically it's interesting. I can still, you know, so I would say, when was it, like beginning of 2023 is when, like, I would say things shifted massively. It was like I had a couple of big shifts with kind of some of the spiritual stuff, and that opened up, and I was doing a lot of meditation, and there was just eventually this realization that, you know, I was no longer living in my mind anymore, and I kind of worked through healing a lot of stuff, and I was there was just this kind of sense of freedom, and I started doing everything that I'd wanted to again. So I got back into exercise, I got socializing, all these things that had been off limits for so long. I just kind of allowed myself to do whatever I wanted again. And I mean, it's been now like a year and a half, maybe a bit longer, and there's been so many kind of later challenges, reintegration challenges, you know, dealing with different aspects of life. And for me, again, this is where some of the Angelo's perspectives on things actually really helped me with this. Is he was like, often you'll have a big shift, and that can create like a honeymoon kind of phase for a couple of months where everything is just a flow state. Basically, this is what it felt like. It was this like flow with life again. And then he was like, often the next layer of kind of, you open up the space for more stuff to come to the surface, you know. But for me, what was crucial was that there wasn't this perspective of this health anxiety and this fear of the symptoms anymore. There was a different perspective on things, where it was like, even the associated sensations that are coming up with this, it's about some kind of root shadow work, root emotion work of, you know, something that now has to be processed. And it's really helpful to have that understanding, because otherwise the mind will turn it into the story of, oh, I've lost something, you know. And I work with people with this as well, where they're like, I was doing really well, and now I'm going through this really intense phase again, and I've lost kind of the clarity of everything's okay. And it's like, this is just like I like how you said it, like, you know, has life tested you? You know, this is the kind of next phase to, and I think of it nowadays as like upgrading the nervous system, basically. So like, whenever something really intense is happening, it's just kind of enhancing your capacity of what you're able to deal with. So it's been interesting for me navigating life on this side, where I've often pushed myself into really intense nervous system states again, out of just like this kind of fearlessness, where it was like, okay, you know, what happens if I hit the gym very hard every day, and I've been working pretty hard with like creating content and like, you know, just, you know, drinking a lot of caffeine and all of this stuff. If we look at it from a nervous system perspective, it's kind of, you know, ramping up the nervous system again. And then it's like, if I do that for too long, then there's like a little bit of a burnout again, maybe for a while. And then it's a reminder for me to be like, oh, okay, let's just slow down a bit. Let's do a little bit more meditation for the next couple of days, maybe like a bit of yoga, all these things to get me back into my body. And it's an awareness of whatever is coming up is just something that needs to be released, if that makes sense. So it's like because like you said, like is there, if there's a new symptom or something like that, what's the reaction? But for me, there's no longer even any labels of symptom or illness or anything like that. But there can still be stuff coming up in the mind, but it's like not getting identified with that, if that makes sense. So it's like, oh, these are just some old thought patterns playing out. There's some associated fear, and it's returning to like, what am I afraid to feel here? And there's been some intense phases, but for me, there's just like, it's just something that needs to pass through the system, and then maybe a couple of days later, things are feeling amazing again. So the whole kind of how do I put it, like umbrella thing of like an illness that's at the root of everything, that kind of dropped away for me. And then it was just like this fluctuating things of like how much can the nervous system tolerate, and kind of often testing my limits with that, like, okay, there I'm kind of hitting a limit with my nervous system, so let's just kind of feel what comes in at that limit, and maybe I do need to pull back for a bit. But then I always do feel like there's lessons there, right? It's like, why am I pushing my limits so much? Am I kind of, maybe I just need to come back into a little bit more balance sometimes. So yeah, that's been my experience.
Okay, I could learn a lot from that because I push myself. I've taken a week off the gym. I do working out at the gym, but I do Thai boxing as well.
Yeah.
I'm working full time and trying to do the podcast, and I don't stop researching. It's relentless.
Yeah.
Information overload, constant. But I never get the sign. I just don't listen to myself.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that I'm trying to really, tap into with meditation. And then I start to get the sign of the burnout. The old one's the vertigo. I actually had vertigo. It kicked in while I was interviewing someone talking about vertigo.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I turned my head that way and I was like, oh. And then finished the interview, went downstairs, had some dinner, and I noticed it was getting worse and worse. And then I spent 3 days in bed. How random is that?
Yeah.
It's almost like I spoke it into existence, but
yeah.
I think for me, it's this regulation of the central nervous system.
Yeah.
I've kind of got rid of all my symptoms and I'm cracking on, but I reckon I push myself to the limit all the time. So
that's the thing though, right? Because I feel like I used to, because I did go through this phase where like everything kind of released, and but I do feel like it's understanding that the nervous system kind of will phase in and out of kind of certain states and balance, and that if we're constantly redlining it, there's going to be responses in the body and all of that. And it's just like, that's our kind of reminder to come back into, maybe some, like a toolkit. Like, this is how I think of it. It's like, okay, what's the toolkit here? Just a couple of days, a little bit more meditation. But there's always like often for me, like a deeper perspective on it as well. It was like, oh yeah, this was triggered. Because also it's often triggered by new things as well. Like, this is what I found. It's like, recently I started exploring like relationship with a girl again. And that's something I hadn't explored for like 3.5 years since my last one ended. And it was like, whoa, there's all these kind of mental triggers and reactions and resistances coming up again. And that was causing me to push myself a little bit too much in some areas of life. But I never look at it as a mistake. Like, for me, like, I made a mistake. It's never the case. It's just like, oh, okay, this is what happens when I do that. Now this is where we're at. Like, this is what we've got going on right now. We have this kind of physical situation. So, let's go deeper into it. Let's work with it. Let's kind of, and then just using things that are helpful, like for me, that's sometimes, a cold shower, a little bit more focus on like nurturing and that, for, like you said, taking a little bit of time off from maybe high intensity exercise, things come back into balance. And then you kind of, I feel like our nervous systems keep track a little bit as well. Like, maybe we don't often take notes like cognitively, but there's a part of us that will maybe start to notice a little bit earlier next time, where it's like, oh, okay, maybe I just do a little bit meditation a little bit sooner or something like that. It's like kind of subconscious tracking. So yeah
Awesome, man. Well, I think that's probably unless there's anything else you wanted to cover, I feel like we've kind of wrap that up really nicely, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to finish up.
Awesome. So, did you want to tell any listeners who have made it through the system freezing on us a few times, made it towards the end, what you're up to at the moment? Is there anything that they can kind of look out for, and where can they find your content and give you a follow? And
Yeah, cool. So my main thing I use is YouTube. Life with Kyle is my YouTube channel, and yeah, I post nowadays. I kind of like to use it to just post a lot of things I'm interested in. So expect to see varying content, but it's mostly around healing, awakening, spirituality, kind of just ending your own suffering, all the stuff that I've explored around there. And then I also have Instagram. I post some stuff on. That's a little bit I'm a little bit more loose on Instagram, just posting some of my daily life stuff. And I might start doing I like to do on my YouTube as well, like conversations with different people and that kind of stuff. So there's a whole mix of things, so check it out if anybody's interested. And I do offer coaching calls. There's you can check, there's a few slots open for people that want to explore some of this stuff, if that resonates at all. I think that's and I have a Spotify as well where I post some of the podcast style stuff, but my Spotify hasn't really taken off.
Yeah. Okay. I'll share all the links at the bottom
awesome.
Of the YouTube video. But no, mate, it's been good. I'm really glad I had you on. We had a bit of a back and forth with time zones, and you once, so I do apologize, but thanks for your patience. And so a lot of the stuff, if you go through, what I talk about is kind of like really going into the health side of things, but I love these conversations where they're a little bit more open, a bit more kind of going into the kind of spiritual aspect. For me personally, it just makes me feel relaxed and chilled out. And there's been a lot of really good information, I'd say, here, and not just new information, but a lot of reminders. I'm kind of hearing you talk. I'm like, oh man, I used to do that and I don't do that anymore. Or I looked at that and I stopped. And so, the good thing about doing these podcasts as well is that's so beneficial for me. These are all topics I'm into. So it's perfect. But I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for everything.
Thanks so much for reaching out and setting this up. I love these conversations as well, because it's like you said, you just get to talk about things that you find interesting, and then also I find it, because I also do conversations with people and stuff, and it's I often feel like I get so much out of it just kind of talking with someone, and also this is what I found. You get this kind of mix of perspectives, and something comes out that maybe neither of us would have thought about in a certain way before, which I always find so incredible. Whenever, talk with someone, it's there's this perspective, and then there's this perspective, and then that kind of opens up a new perspective. So I love these conversations.
Sometimes talking yourself, you're kind of relearning things. These things are in the back of your mind, and you've not really thought about that in a while.
Exactly.
It brings it back to the forefront as well. So
exactly. It's reflecting back on these things that are there, but you've kind of forgotten.
That's it, exactly. So awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay. Looking forward.